Hello, I'm Philip Danielson. I'm a former professor, former attorney, former military officer in the Air Force, and I have been watching what has been going on in the Middle East and in the United States over the last several weeks and days and even hours now. And I thought that my perspective as, frankly, a negotiation expert, which is my background, might be helpful in understanding exactly what's going on and a few takes that I think might give some insight into what has happened and what we can anticipate moving forward. So there are a couple things that stick out. Number one, I'd like to discuss briefly what we've seen over, let's say since Israel started attacking Iran in Iran. The attacks were really hard. Obviously, that crosses a line that hadn't been crossed before. As a negotiation expert, let me just mention the use of force is a method of negotiating, especially if the idea is not total annihilation or even complete capitulation. Then it can be used as a way to increase one's leverage, or if there is no leverage, to actually create it. So with Israel doing what they did over the last several weeks in the bombing campaign that they have been hitting systematically at the heart of their concerns about a nuclear weapon, and also attempting to, frankly, let's call it decapitate the leadership of Iran. Now, on its face, that looks like extremely provocative and crossing a line which might lead to, obviously, the concern would be an escalation and to the point where there's full-out war. However, with my military background, I look at what was going on, and I saw two countries, neither of which had the ability to either attempt to secure or hold land. So the idea of what we would consider a conventional war, where land is acquired and therefore stripping them. I mean, we see that going on with Ukraine and Russia. There's a fight over land, both of which have armies that can both take and kill. In this case, this is more lobbing rockets back and forth. And there was some component of let's call it special operators from Israel that were attempting to kill nuclear scientists as well as other leadership within Iran. But there has never been, and I cannot imagine the idea that either one would attempt to invade the other country. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be a great deal of damage done. But within the scope of, let's call it World War III, I think it's okay to temper one's concerns and reduce one's anxiety over the idea of a full-out World War III. Now, the one variable, or let's call it the wild card in that, would be the idea of some type of a nuclear bomb or a dirty bomb or some type of let's call it an escalation beyond that which we haven't seen since World War II. And while I do believe Israel has that capability, that is off the table unless and until there is some type of a monumental strike that would be an existential threat, an imminent existential threat to Israel. So what are we seeing then with the bombing? It was a direct campaign to degrade the nuclear capability of Iran, as well as attempt to, there will be no, let's call it regime change from armed, let's call them occupying armies to compel a regime change. But clearly, Israel would be okay if what they were doing spurred internal conflict and internal chaos, which could result in that, especially with the removal of, let's call it the most intransigent leaders of Iran. So that's one. Number two, President Trump ordered the bombing of 3 nuclear facilities. What was interesting about that was he had just said a couple of things. He was very clear about that he would give peace and negotiating peace, or at least some type of let's call it a truce, 60 days. And what was interesting is on day 61 or day 62, he hit them, and he hit them hard. That's an interesting concept. That one thing in negotiation that should be always remembered is, frankly, there isn't much difference between, let's say, threats and promises. Both of them have to do with future outcomes, and you have to have the ability to carry out either the threat or the promise. If you don't, then those threats and promises become neutered, and the power in the negotiation, the leverage actually leaves you, the person who's making those threats or promises, and goes to the other party. We've seen threats and red lines crossed and nothing ever done. But in the grand scheme of things, those promises and threats need to be complied, internally complied, self-complied, disciplined, to be able to effectively create the leverage that you want in order to persuade or even compel the other party to come to the table. And so on day 62, it was one of those, that's when the bombing began. And then after attempting to negotiate, and to the point where President Trump actually mentioned, we will decide whether we're going to bomb within 2 weeks. Now, what he didn't say is we won't bomb until 2 weeks. And of course, that was a distraction and a diversion on the part of the United States and on the part of President Trump. Now, that's part of negotiating as well. You want to be as open and candid as you can to be able to create some level of trust. However, one thing that was explained during the process and explained after the fact by the United States was Iran stopped negotiating in good faith. If you are attempting to negotiate in good faith with somebody that doesn't have good faith, that isn't expressing themselves in an authentic and true manner, then you are frankly capitulating, and you're giving the other side time to do things which will create leverage against you. And frankly, that's what Iran was trying to do. It looks like they were trying to slow play the United States until they had the leverage of some type of an operational nuclear missile that would be able to then be held over the heads of both Israel and all of the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia and other countries, Jordan, in an attempt to then really take, let's say, a leadership role in a very bad way of the Middle East. And so it was clear, and by the way, President Trump isn't the first president to say Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. That goes back years and years and years. Frankly, as soon as they began to develop one, the first President Bush, the President Clinton, I just heard him today talking about it, that he had that same stance, and he'd done some things in order to slow the building of their bomb. And that has been going on since. And Iran was able to slow play it, and there were some negotiations, and the JCPOA was established in an attempt to allow them to get close to a bomb but not cross that line. That was actually under Obama. President Trump then, of course, refused to honor that that agreement. It wasn't a treaty, but an agreement. And then President Biden reinstated it. The problem with that is if you were really, it appears as though it didn't really slow Iran down in their development of the nuclear weapon. And from what it looks like, there was sufficient credible evidence that they were in fact getting very close. And when they do, the leverage, the balance of leverage changes dramatically. In a negotiation, in any type of, let's say, a political situation, you have to understand as many of the variables as possible. And as soon as one of those variables, like Iran having a functional nuclear missile, that changes everything on its head, because now they have the ability, if they want to, fulfill their promises and their rhetoric of blowing up Israel. And by the way, that wouldn't preclude them going after the United States at some point. So the second component that I'd like to bring up with respect to Trump and the bombing was he was attempting to maintain the status quo. And that meant a pre-nuclear bomb Iran. He wanted to maintain that. One other thing, I remember reading some research that had to do with religious observance and how religious organizations attempt to do what they call boundary maintenance. And that is, you strengthen those that are in your, you do two things. Number one, you strengthen those within your congregation. And then you also make sure those that are struggling with it know that there are lines that can't be crossed within the boundary of what it means to be within your religion. And so I'm gonna take that definition, boundary maintenance, and apply it here in a political sense. What President Trump did was he attempted to do some boundary maintenance with what was going on with Iran. Now, the boundary changed after he was elected, meaning under President Biden's approach was the carrot, right? We'll give you good things if you do good things. And Trump didn't feel like Iran was acting in good faith, and so those efforts were seen as disingenuous, and Iran was able to exploit that. President Trump took the position of a stick, saying, if you continue to do this, there will be consequences, and we'll give us 60 days, you'll have 60 days to negotiate it with us, and if you don't, either we don't come up with an agreement, or especially if we think you're not acting in good faith, well, then there will be consequences, the stick. So eventually lines are there is not any type of a negotiated settlement, and consequently President Trump reacted. He did so overwhelmingly, which was very distinct and important. I had a professor in law school who literally wrote the book on legal negotiation, and he talked about a technique called tit for tat plus one. And the point is when you were negotiating with somebody that really wasn't trying to negotiate in good faith, you needed to respond not just equivalently, but beyond that. So beyond tit for tat, right? They do something in an effort which demonstrates their bad faith. You then need to express or do something that shows that that is unacceptable and will not be accepted. Now, what you do there is you go beyond that, right? You don't just do that, you do something. And the example that I've used for years that sometimes seems very hyperbolic, but in this scenario, what we're seeing today is actually quite apropos. And that is, if somebody hits you in the face, you get out your bat and you hit them in the head. Now here's the plus one. You hit them in the head, and then you apologize that you had to do that to get their attention, and that you still would like to have some type of a, let's say, amicable resolution of the problem. So you do not accept the bad faith, the punch in the face, and you retaliate not just in kind but one level above it, and then you apologize that had to do it. Now the idea behind that is you then show that person that they will have to face negative consequences beyond maybe their capacity to then reflect that toward you. Very important. So what do we see here? President Trump, knowing that they were getting close to having a nuclear weapon, he decided to absolutely obliterate anything that he could. In fact, I think he used the word obliterate, that he could do to make sure that they not only don't have one now, but make it extremely difficult for them to re-engage in the process. And then he said, if you would like, we can continue to come to a settlement and a resolution. We saw that today. Now, it was very interesting. We should have anticipated some type of retaliation from Iran, because they also, the whole purpose of their regime is to stay in power. And so for them to maintain some type of, let's say, stave face within their own people, they had to do something. What they did was calculated and measured. And what I mean by that is, and oh, by the way, let's go back to the United States' initial attack. They hit them with bombs that had never been used before in this type of an arrangement. The bunker buster bombs that, as far as I know, have never been used in combat. By doing so, they limited it also to the nuclear facilities. They didn't go after decapitating the leadership. Israel had attempted that, but not the U.S. And nor did they hit civilian population or even military population. So that it may not seem like they were measured, but they sure as heck could have. And the United States chose not to. So now Iran gets the idea. They've now been hit in the head with a bat, as it were, after attempting to punch Israel and threatening to eliminate Israel as well as the United States. Iran was very measured, and in fact, they went so far as to tell us that they would be hitting us, though they didn't specify. As I understand it, they didn't specify exactly where. When they did, and they gave us notice, and by the way, this is exactly the same thing after the assassination of Soleimani. That's exactly what Iran did, and it de-escalated the situation rather than escalating it. It now appears as though we had a response which was far below what the initial hit was, so it's the exact opposite of a tit for tat plus one. This is, we're going to hit so that we can save face, and saving face in a negotiation is a valid thing, and usually extremely important, or you'll never get the chance to negotiate with that party again, because they'll be taken out. So they respond, and then they both come to the table. As I understand it, Iran reached out to the United States, and Israel also, in an attempt, or actually through Qatar, to attempt to come to a resolution. And a resolution, it appears as though, was reached. Now we'll have to see. Once again, we'll see if people act in good faith. Will they respond in what appears as though what their best interest is? A couple final notes. I think China and Russia were intimately involved in helping Iran to see that it was in their best interest to de-escalate the situation. Sometimes you can be like Icarus, you can play a little too close to the sun, and the next thing you know, you get yourself in trouble. I think that's what happened with Iran here, and I am quite sure China in particular said, you will not mine the Strait of Hormuz. You will not restrict our ability to continue to obtain the oil that we need to, both from you as well as other sources in the Gulf. So And I think Russia also had a part to play in that too. So as much as we want to see everybody as bad guys and good guys, and there are bad guys and there are some good guys, and sometimes those are mixed. The good guys can be bad guys and vice versa. In this case, all of those things have led to what appears to be peace. Now let me make one note of caution. There's an old parable. I'm going to get it bad, but I'll do my best here. There's an old gentleman. He has a son. His son is, and they live in a small village. And his son falls off his horse and breaks his leg. And the people in the village tell him, "That's tragic. That's terrible. How bad for your family. What terrible luck." And he responds, "Perhaps," meaning perhaps it was bad luck or it was a misfortune. The next day, the army comes through of his little village and takes all the eligible young men to go to war. And they say, "Wow, how fortunate. What a good thing. Congratulations on your good luck." And he said, "Perhaps." The same, perhaps. And the point by that is what appears to be good or bad situation can flip on its head in a moment, and bad news can become good and good can become bad. So I would say be cautious at this point. It's my understanding that there is still some bombing going on. This is Monday night, which the ceasefire hasn't technically been implemented yet. But these things rarely go smoothly. And so once again, we hope for good things, and let's just say perhaps that will be the case. And then be vigilant and alert as to bad things that can still happen. Bad faith by either party or all parties. So with that, once again, my name is Philip Danielson. I love negotiation. I love the tech to see the world through the eyes of a negotiator, because you begin to see things that are said and unsaid, and most importantly, things that are done and not done, which actually usually show more of the truth than actually words being shared. Thank you for your time.